Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Hi, Lisa K. Donner here for Liberty Nation, and with me today is the lovely Miss Sarah Cowgill, hailing from the Heartland. She's our national correspondent. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Lisa.
Also, Graham J. Noble has had a very busy week writing and satirizing. Welcome, Graham.
How you doing?
And hailing from parts unknown in Europe, Onar Am. Hi, Onar. Thanks so much for joining us.
Howdy.
Well, this week I thought it would be fun if we just kind of did a leftist week in review. We have three topics. We are going to be talking about Tucker Carlson, Trump, Macron, and the third will be, can anybody remember?
Election recounts? I don't know. Off the top of my head.
All right. Well, we're going to leave that in because we're just being real today. I'm calling them Florida election anomalies, and that is the truth. Anyway, on October 13th, Tucker Carlson went to Charlottesville, was at a private country club with his family, and some jerk, I guess, bellied up to the well, no, he didn't belly up to the bar. I think he went up to Tucker Carlson's daughter, who was coming back from the ladies' room, and called her a bunch of names that are not arable. Who wants to go on that one first?
I think, thank God Tucker Carlson wasn't armed, or that guy would be pushing up daisies right now. If that was my daughter, I wouldn't put up with that.
Well, his son was armed apparently with a glass of wine. What's your take on that, Graham?
Yeah, I tend to agree. If that had happened to me, if I had a daughter and I was present at the time that happened to me, the guy would, well, he'd think himself lucky if all he had to do was pick up his teeth. But you know, this situation is really getting out of hand, and sooner or later, one of these crazy leftists, you know, I'm not famous enough for them to pick on, but you know, they're going to one day pick on somebody like me, and they're going to get hurt real bad, and then things are just going to get out of control from there. I fear, unfortunately, that's going to happen. There's no reason for this. I mean, I wouldn't dream of doing that to a, you know, a daughter of, say, I don't know, any of the left wing pundits. I wouldn't dream of doing such a thing. It's just not acceptable.
Oh, no. So there you are sitting in Europe watching this circus, I guess. What do you guys make of what's going on in America, where people are at a private club and their daughters get called just horrendous names? I mean, what's the banter and the talk about what's going on in America from a European perspective?
Well, in Europe, things like this is not reported as often because we just get the bad news about whenever Donald Trump sneezes or something like that, and then it becomes a headline. Whenever someone is actually attacked on the right, then it's not really reported. So there was no news about this. But my own perspective is that you can tell if someone is truly offended or if they're just make-believe offended by the way they react. Someone who is hurt and offended is usually passive. He's perplexed and he doesn't know what happened, what struck him. But someone who is looking for a fight, someone who's looking for an excuse to hit someone or to abuse someone, pretends that they are offended and makes a scene. And this is what we're seeing in America now. I think there are a lot of people who are filled with hate and are using this as an excuse to go around saying things that they otherwise would not be able to do.
All right, let's pick up the discussion with Trump Macron here. Now, there's a lot of going on about this word nationalism, and actually, my better half has a really good piece on libertynation.com called 5 Facts About Nationalism, where we seem to be conflating regular nationalism, that is, you know, just patriotism and sovereignty of the state, with white nationalism, which is an entirely different story. So because, well, let's start with you, Graham. What's your take on this Trump-Macron thing?
Yeah, I totally agree about the essentially the misinterpretation of the word nationalism, because it certainly does have connotations that have been accepted, political connotations, which are rightly or wrongly pinned on uh, the extreme right, if you like. This happened in the UK years ago. I don't know if it still exists, but in the UK they used to have a party called the British National Party, which were basically a bunch of skinheads. They were kind of neo-Nazis, didn't want any foreigners in the country, all of this kind of stuff. But I think the word nationalism, I definitely think the left in America is using that word to bind it to the idea of white nationalism, because nationalism itself is a fairly innocuous term when you think about it. I mean, even one of the pioneers of the American progressive movement, Theodore Roosevelt, used the phrase "new nationalism," and used it in a very famous speech once, which is known as the New Nationalism speech, which he made in Kansas. And so, there's nothing wrong with the concept of nationalism. It's simply about putting the interests of one's nation first and foremost. It doesn't necessarily mean to the exclusion of everybody else. It just means that you are putting your own nation first, which Trump, to be fair, has often said on the world stage. He said at the UN that he expects every other country in the world to do exactly that as well.
Yeah, I mean, do we really think China's not nationalistic, or and frankly, France is. I don't know why they act like they aren't, and he called them out on it. Onar, what's your take?
First of all, I think that Macron was being very, very strange when he says that the soldiers in 1914 who participated in World War I did so to defend globalism. That is like turning everything on its head. They were not defending globalism. They were defending their own nations, and they would never have gone to war unless it was to defend their own nations.
Mm-hmm.
So nationalism, I mean, border control is nationalism. And I guess some people are against border control for that reason. But think about Gandhi. He was a nationalist. And you have Nelson Mandela was a nationalist. And that worked out fine. So nationalism doesn't have to be connected to any particular political direction.
So the term nationalism itself is not exclusively bound to the political right. One of the pioneers of American progressivism, Theodore Roosevelt, actually used the term new nationalism, and he used it in a very famous speech, actually, which he gave in Kansas, and it was generally known as the New Nationalism speech. But of course, the left today, at least, has very much bound the term nationalism to the idea of white nationalism. They've, like everything else, they've attached the race card to it.
Macron's attack on nationalism is very strange, but because consider that Mahatma Gandhi was a nationalist, Nelson Mandela was a nationalist, Dalai Lama is a nationalist. So you have all these people who are nationalists that, like Dalai Lama is a self-avowed Marxist. Okay, so is he then far right because he's a nationalist? It just doesn't make any sense. Just because you are for border control doesn't mean that you're far right. Nationalism means that you want to protect your own country. And Macron had the audacity to claim that the soldiers of the World War I were fighting for globalism. That's absurd. They were fighting for their own countries and to defend their own honor and their own nations. And when American soldiers went on the beaches of Normandy in 1944, they were doing so to defend America, American patriotism. They were not doing it for globalism. And it is very, very strange to paint these people as somehow almost neo-Nazis when they were fighting actual Nazis. I mean, the people who were on those beaches would today be painted as far right by Macron. which is absurd.
Well, he
Yeah.
may have married his teacher, but he didn't marry his high school history teacher. I mean, the guy's all over the board, and it's almost like you want to know what she's whispering in his ear. We don't know enough about her, I think. Maybe I'll have to look into that.
Well, finally, let's go to the Florida election anomalies. We've got all kinds of stuff going on. I mean, every day it's a new nightmare, and I'm just wondering, do you think we're going to end up with kind of a full and fair result here? Anyone?
Florida's a mess. Brenda Snipes needs to be sat down, fired, and jailed for her role going back, the last 10 years or whenever Jeb appointed her. I'm not even sure of the date on that. But
Right, but
Jeb
now
Bush
she's
appointed
been
her.
elected. But now she's been elected till 2020.
Well, she needs to go. She was telling the Miami Herald today that she intends to resign, but she hasn't told her family yet. Now, I mean, if her family reads, they already know. She's all over the board, and maybe she's got some issues that she needs to have addressed as well. But something's rolling down the hill, or she wouldn't step down lightly.
Yeah, Graham, you've been covering this closely. What do you say?
Well, I think mostly we everyone likes to talk about the integrity of the vote and the integrity of elections, and a big part of that is not just about this talking point that we always hear about. Well, we've got to make sure that every vote counts. Sure, we do have to make sure that every legal vote counts, but when you're talking about what is a legal vote and what is election integrity, you've got to have some rules that everybody plays by. And that means that voting is conducted on certain days, unless it's an early voting, or we have these, we have a lot of different conditions that I'm not necessarily think, absentee voting is one thing, of course. There's a legitimate reason for that. I'm not sure that we should even have such a thing as early voting anymore. I think you have an election day on which everyone votes. And, I'm a former, in one of my many past lives, I used to train international election supervisors for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So, I've actually gone into a country, in my case, it was Bosnia, and actually helped to, well, for a start, I actually helped to write and edit the polling manual for the election, for the presidential election. And then I was actually training people on how to actually supervise an election, set up a polling station, conduct the voting, count the ballots, report the results, all of this stuff. And you've got to have integrity of an election, means you've got to have a set of rules, and you've got to have, okay, this is the day that you vote. When you get to the polling station, this is what you have to do. This is how you cast your ballot. This is how the votes are counted. This is the deadline. This is how they're reported. All of those rules are part of the concept of election integrity. And it just seems to me that the Democrats in Florida have simply said, well, we're not going to abide by any of those rules. We're just going to allow this process to carry on kind of willy-nilly until, anybody and their dog who wants to go and vote at any time they like can just do so. And we'll just all sit around here and wait for your vote to show up, and then decide whether or not it's going to count. There is no integrity to elections if you're simply going to ignore the rules of the election.
True.
All right, let me just jump in very quickly and say one thing, and that is, what if we just had one thing, and that would be the number of people who actually voted in a state? If we had that one number, right? Like this is the whole pie, then you can't get into the business of adding votes and here's some extra and here's some more, and there's some up here, and if we had that one number, these are the number of people that voted by X amount of time in the state of Florida, I think that would cut down on a lot of things. Onar.
I think that an insight by Dr. Jordan Peterson could be of interest here. And he's a psychologist and points out differences in personality between the people on the left and the right. People on the left tend to be more open-minded, and the people on the right tend to be more. They like more boundaries and rules. So the left tend to be rule breakers. And this is for both good and bad. I mean, when it comes to creativity, breaking rules and norms is a good thing. But when it comes to crime and corruption and actually following procedures, breaking rules is not a good thing. So Jordan Peterson says that people on the left tend to be better suited for creative or liberal arts, whereas conservatives are better at managing things, making things work, just keeping the lights on. So maybe an idea would be that Republicans or conservatives are the ones in charge of doing the counting, because they're best at following rules and procedures, and they're best at not
And they know how to
being
count.
corrupt and
Yeah.
and cheating.
Oh, that'll go over. Sorry, but that's not going to happen. Anyway, I just want to say thank you all very much for joining us today. This has been another edition of the Liberty Nation Roundtable. Please read the fine articles of Sarah, Onar, and Graham on libertynation.com. I'm Lisa K. Donner, editor-in-chief, and remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a nice day.
Visit us at libertynation.com.